Welcome back, Book Fiends. I am here with my special guest, Brittany from Books with Brittany. We are going to be talking about Hyperion Cantos, at least books 1 and 2. But I'll let her introduce herself and maybe tell a little bit about her channel. I'm sure many of you have already heard of her before, but she has a pretty phenomenal channel called Books with Brittany, and I'll let her talk in there.
Yeah, I just have the channel Books with Brittany where I talk about mostly adult sci-fi, fantasy, some horror. I read a little nonfiction and other things too, but I am learning how much I love sci-fi this year. So glad to be here today. Thank you for having me on the chat.
Thank you for joining. It's thanks to you that this exists because I had put off Hyperion for a very long time. And I guess that's what we'll jump into is how we both were introduced to Hyperion. How did you first come across Stan Simmons' work, Hyperion?
So that cover right behind you with the Shrike that we see, I would see it all the time, and I don't think it really grabbed my attention. For some reason, it felt like a really intimidating book that other people maybe scared me off of. I went into it thinking it was going to be really hard to understand or really dense and confusing, which is completely not the case. No. And I find it extremely accessible. But I really haven't heard people on BookTube talk about it too frequently. It was maybe mentioned a time or two because there wasn't, I think when you and I started reading it, there really wasn't much buzz around it, many other people. But with the Dune obsession and learning how much I love sci-fi, I was like, this book definitely has its merit. I don't know if it's won awards, but I had heard good things about it, and it's time to pick it up.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. And I'm glad that you did because I followed suit right with you because I saw that, Brittany's reading it. I'm going to check it out. It was fitting the Dune obsession, and it kind of feels like a sci-fantasy world to me. And I first had come across it when I worked for Borders Books a long time ago. I used to shelve it all the time, that specific cover, and just be like, this looks cool, but I don't know, it's not for me. And I wasn't as drawn to sci-fi, which is crazy. I loved sci-fi movies growing up. Like, I was a Star Wars kid. I was a Fifth Element kid. But for books, it was always just like Forgotten Realms, D&D books, fantasy. I kind of distanced myself from it. And I think for the similar reasons, I always thought that people, would always often say to me, it's going to be too complicated for me, or it's too high a reading level for you to understand at this age. Yeah. So I always avoided it, which may have been true at the time with my brain as it was back then. But I think I would have been all right. Now that I've read them, I don't think they're simplistic in any means, Dune and Hyperion, but I do feel like they're very accessible. Mm-hmm. I put it off for a very long time, and when I saw that you were diving into it, I had to jump on the wagon because I just wanted to be part of the experience, as well as find out what these books are all about. There are 4 books in the series, and we have officially, as of me yesterday, a couple weeks ago, finished Book 1, Hyperion, and Book 2, which is The Fall of Hyperion. I had a very emotional experience and an emotional response to the ending of the second book. The ending of both books is pretty emotional, but I felt like, similar to Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049, where both properties, one can't exist without the other. It's like the perfect sequel. Like, if Hyperion was A New Hope, Fall of Hyperion was Empire Strikes Back, I felt like. And I felt like it was the perfect ending of it. It didn't feel like I know I had seen some people saying that they wish the first 2 books were one, and I'm so happy they weren't. I felt like the first book was perfect, and it left you on a good, solid cliffhanger that didn't feel forced, and then the second book just gave you everything you wanted and more. And I don't know what your exact reaction was to the very last few chapters of the book, but I can say that I straight up ugly cried at that last chapter.
Fall of Hyperion?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that, going back to what you were saying, both books ended perfectly, and they absolutely needed to be 2 books, in my opinion. Now, I like cliffhangers, so that's not something that bothers me, but I think it was so smart, the way that we get this backstory of why everything's happening in the first book, who these people are, why things matter, and then we continue on to see what happens from there. So with the ending of both books, I was just sitting in shock, kind of like, I don't know what to think right now. I know that I have a lot of processing to do, and it's sort of where you feel isolated in your reading experience if you're sitting there alone, because I actually finished the book at work in between patients, and I was like screaming. I like ran out of the room, all my PPE on, and I was like, I'm not okay. I'm not okay.
Yeah, that was me. I think I paced my house back and forth the last like 2 chapters, and when the last moment happens, I was just like, 5 out of 5, just, and then just streamed, started bawling my eyes out. I was like, that was perfect. That felt so well constructed and cohesive, but also like emotionally resonated with me and on multiple different levels. But it was just like the ride, which is something we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I wanted to, before we begin deep diving into what we love about it, and why we think other people should check it out, is if you could describe Hyperion and or Fall of Hyperion, just in general, the first 2 books in one word, what would be your describing word for it?
So when you sent me this question, I I really was stumped. I didn't know what to say. I think that it's hard to choose one word to encompass all of my feelings without being misleading, because I think that for me, I could almost choose like a descriptive word for me, like anxious, because it puts you on the edge of your seat, but not in a bad way. Like, I feel like that kind of gives it a bad label, but I mean, there's so many thrilling, mind bending, like, you know what I mean? What is your word?
I feel like your saying anxious was almost the word I picked. I almost picked urgent.
Okay.
As a way, basically, a way of conveying anxiety, not necessarily in a bad way.
Yeah.
But just like the intensity of the book.
Yeah.
My word, and I had a couple of them, and again, they like you, that they kind of felt misleading, or I'm like, no, that's not enough. It doesn't quite cover it. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, maybe I'll just take this question off. And I was like, you know what? I like the idea of urgency and live. So I picked vital. Sort of like as Webster Dictionary, just defines vital as having remarkable energy, liveliness, or force of personality. How that pertains to Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, and why the word vital is what I chose. I felt like everything mattered, and it was very much alive, and I was a mere spectator. It wasn't for me. It exists without me, and I was lucky enough to follow along in the story. We come in kind of at the midnight hour of this big event happening. The world is about to undergo a major change that's going to affect the entire cosmos of this world, and we're just kind of like along for the ride. Not as like not in a passive way, not in like a we don't matter, because I think the reader does matter in this book. But I did feel that sense of like, oh, this is urgent. What's happening? Everything that happens matters. There's no like senseless world building. There's no senseless character development. Everything these people are telling me is important, and I'm along for the ride and is living and breathing with this energy that like you can't help but like sink into while you're reading it. Like I felt myself being like pulled into it, and like I was plugged into the story. I had other books I was supposed to read for the end of May that I just like they were just gone. They were on the wayside, and I just buckled in and usually I can juggle at minimal 2 books at a time, but I couldn't. I was stuck on Fall of Hyperion all the way through.
Well, and I think it says something that both of the words that we chose are similar and portray that sense of urgency. I think that it makes sense too, because I remember some people saying in our buddy read that they wish there was more world building or information at the beginning of this book or just throughout it. And I was like, no, I don't think that's what the author was trying to do. He wasn't trying to give you these long, not even if they weren't info dumps, we weren't trying to say, here's the place and here's the people and here's what they're doing. It was, you're going to see things as they're experiencing it, whether it's a journal entry or, simulation fighting, military aspects, flashbacks of other family members. That's how you're going to find things out. And that helps with that sense of urgency and feeling like everything is important rather than stopping the story to hear from the author to describe something.
I remember reading that too and feeling like I almost disagreed with what they were saying about wanting more world building, because I felt like there was so much of it. And it kind of moves into my next question. What about the world of Hyperion sets it apart from other worlds in science fiction or other sci fantasy or other books similar to it? And you've sort of already begun that topic in talking about how Dan Simmons really relies heavily on character and his writing style in the reader to sort of trust that the world will make sense by the end of the book or even halfway through the book. There's something about Dan Simmons' work in Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion. He relies heavily on character, themes, and various connections of art and culture from our world. But mainly for me, he uses environmental storytelling, at least in these first two books, where I felt like the world, whether it be a newscast or whether it be the characters talking about things that happen in their lives, or just like the visual descriptions of these different planets and worlds, that was conveying the story, the world building for us. We didn't have to have a person be like, this is this planet, this is what this planet's all about. You kind of got that through the historical context that each character provided, whether they be conversing with each other. Like, there was never a moment where I felt like a narrator was talking to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then just to like expand upon that a little bit, I think that something in some of my favorite books with my favorite authors is they leave something up to your imagination. I feel like Dan Simmons didn't want to over-explain everything to where some things were left to the reader's imagination, because we have some wild things in this world, down to the way the Shrike is described. We have flame forests, we have Tesla trees, we have like all these crazy things, the flying mats, whatever all of these unique things to this world are. There's this sense of wonder and mystery when they're not described in detail or overly detailed, in an overly detailed way, to where you can fill in those blanks with your mind to almost shape it to something that you were thinking of, if that makes sense.
It gives you the pieces to kind of create your own image. Like, I almost kind of piggybacking off of that, I almost would love to see like a thought experiment and just ask everyone to describe or draw what the Shrike looks like to them.
Yeah.
And I feel like it would be similar, but everyone would have this different idea of what that entity is like. And I feel like Dan Simmons' writing really like lends to that. It really allows that creative freedom of our own imaginations while reading. He gives us the pieces for it, but it's not like overly described.
And I am not somebody who pictures things well when I'm reading. It just doesn't happen for me. But I liked this book because it made me sit back and really imagine, use my creativity and use my imagination to picture what I think he was trying to describe.
For
so
sure.
It's more of like an interactive reading experience that way, I suppose. You have to think about it a little bit more.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely found myself stopping after certain chapters and just kind of visualizing, whether I try to pull up some art or just try to like think about what did that just look like, or how do I imagine that? Like, it was fun. It was almost reminiscent of like a Malazan read in a way. How you try to like you get this environmental storytelling from the author, where the world is telling you, to relaying you information. And I suppose if you passively read it like quickly and aren't like picking up on it, it might seem like it needs more world building, but I felt like it had not necessarily too much. I felt like it was crammed. Like, I continuously was finishing chapters being like, how did he keep all these thoughts and all these world building aspects organized? It felt like I was almost like imagining a web on the wall, almost like that Charlie Day meme where he's like drawing all the connections and stuff. Like, he has to have some sort of master timeline or master world map what this universe looks like, from the AI level of being inside like the web to like, on a planet level of these farmers riding floating wagons across a sea of grass that is kind of like glass, metallic glass, like just super cool stuff like that. That blew me away.
That's something too, coming from somebody who is not, that doesn't really pay attention to world building as much as a lot of people, or settings. I mean, sometimes I don't even know if we're inside or outside when I'm reading. It's just not something I pay attention to. And there's like specific times I can remember, whether it's a scene with where Sad King Billy was, or where the poet was at certain times. Like, I can picture exactly where they were sitting or what they were doing, because of the way he described what was happening. It like left you with an emotional impact, which is a weird thing to say about world building. Yeah,
it made the rooms that this takes place in matter. Like the rooms themselves became memorable. Yeah. It's kind of like George Lucas when he did Star Wars. I think he said he made a joke about why it was so easy to make back then. It wasn't easy to make back then, but why the stories are so easy to tell, and why sci-fi can be really hard sometimes. Is like Star Wars basically takes place in like 4 to 5 rooms. If you think about it, you have like desert, Falcon, Death Star, Falcon. Like that's pretty much like it. There's a few other in between, but I felt like the rooms in this setting, I remembered. I remembered King Billy's area. I remember the bar, Cicero's they would go to. I remember the wind wagon that they traveled on and the train carts. The time tombs themselves became like, and I think a lot of that has to do with how long we spend there, which makes me appreciate the pacing of the story as well as the locations. Not necessarily, specifically they're very detailed and I think stunning, but in most books we're moving. We're not usually in one place for a very long time. And I know that might make it seem like parts of this book might be boring for some because you're stuck in one spot, but I never felt bored.
Oh, no.
Being among, especially the time tombs, where I felt like I could really visualize what they look like, and to the point where anytime they returned to a room or returned to a space that they had mentioned previously, it like brought back memories of the first book and earlier scenes in those spaces. And that's not something I get out of every book that I read.
Right.
So I really appreciate it. So for topics of discussion, I get a couple of them. We don't have to hit on all of them. These are just some things that stood out to me that I really enjoyed in these books. And of course, Brittany, if you have ones you want to bring up too, feel free to add to the conversation. I'm sure this will be part one of many more Hyperion videos as we continue our read into Hyperion Cantos. There are 2 more books to go. And I would love to do like a second and third installment to the series, as well as try to get more people engaged in the community and talking about this book. Upon finishing the second one, I was very surprised at how little I hear on these days anyway about this book being read. Similar to Dune, where like there's not enough buzz for it, I feel like, and I'm sure like I'm probably just missing out. There's probably some corner of YouTube that I'm just missing completely. That's probably amazing, and everyone's having a great time there or on Reddit. But I'm just surprised that more people don't talk about this book, with how incredible the story is, how intricate and well crafted the prose and the writing is, and how memorable it is. Like I felt like very similar to Red Rising, where that series, I can remember each book vividly. It sticks with me for years afterwards. This is going to be one of those books that is going to be stuck with me for a long time, I think.
Absolutely. And that's why it's been so fun to be able to read it with you, because I'm over here screaming about this. Same thing with Dune. And I'm like, please let Nick like as much as me. And then when I hear you screaming, I'm like, thank God, because I even said that in my wrap up the other day. I was like, I didn't think I'd find something that I would love as much as Red Rising. And then I find Dune. And then I find Hyperion. And I'm like, okay, there's more out here. There are other things that are this good. And like you said, I do not for the life of me understand why these books aren't being talked about. Because to me, they're like nearly perfect books. So
yeah, it's funny you say that, because last night when I finished Fall of Hyperion, I was like, that was the perfect book. That was next to Alex E. Harrow's 1,000 Days of January, which I think is me and your like lately our go-to. And someone says, what do you think is the perfect book? Yeah. There are many books out there that probably are considered the perfect book or similar to it. Personally, I think that 1,000 Days of January is very close to being, a perfect book. And this one, I felt like there was nothing that I felt like missed the mark. Mm-hmm. There was nothing that I wanted more. I mean, there's plenty more and more, but I didn't want to leave.
Right.
There were some answers that I still had, but they weren't like loopholes or things left behind unconsciously. Everything had a point and a reason, and we'll find out more as we progress in the story. But I felt like these first 2 books was like the perfect part 1. Just was very, very impressed in general. As a writer, as a reader, as a big fan of fiction, this book series alone really shook up how I understand stories to be told. And I feel like lately I've been running into a lot of these books that have been doing that to me. So I don't know if that's just me like maturing as a reader and a writer, or just realizing something that I should have realized a long time ago, and I'm late to the game. But with these books, the use of perspective and point of view changes. The book itself, both of them aren't told in just one point of view, one first person, second person, or third person point of view. That they're told in different ways, different POVs. The first book being largely third person for the story that's happening now in the present. And then as each pilgrim is telling their story, we get first person perspectives from them, which I felt like was really cool because it makes the story feel immediate. It made it feel like they were telling it to me.
Yeah.
but like I never would have thought to mix point of views, and that's just my own ignorance of thinking like, oh, point of view should just be you pick one and that's the story. But after reading this, I'm like, I want to read more books like this. This is like, it doesn't have to be a certain way. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be many. It's whatever enhances the story, whatever the story is calling for. I wasn't sure how you felt about that, and I wasn't sure how Fall of Hyperion was going to replicate it. And I feel like it did it in a cool way that was very different from the first book, but it did just as well.
You know, I'm not a reader that really pays attention that much to the way the like POV that a story is told in. I think obviously like the second person is the easiest because it like stands out the most from the others for me to notice.
Yeah.
I feel most attached in first person, so I appreciated having that element in both Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion. I think that really helped me get attached to each character. So I was glad that was included. But I think it was the perfect mixture having both in Fall of Hyperion. And it added just an interesting format. And like you said, now I think it's going to make me sort of notice in other books and determine like why we don't see the combination as much. I will say, because I'm not a writer and it doesn't stand out to me that much. When I first started reading Fall of Hyperion and I noticed the change in POV from the first person, and then we started seeing from the other characters, it really threw me off for a second, but not in a way that I was like, oh, I don't like this. This is bad. But I was kind of like trying to picture why the switch was there, which it was very, like, I'm obviously not going to spoil anything, but I think it was very smart and done on purpose and worked perfect for the story being told. So
100%. I think it lends to that thing we were talking about earlier about the word we used to describe the urgency, the anxiety, the vitalness of it. It added to the live wire feeling. This book felt like an exposed wire, just like sparking like next to water. That's how it felt to me. It was like I was holding on for dear life, being shocked. And I think the point of view changes lend to that, because I never felt like I never got bored or lost in the point of view. It always felt like it was mixing it up so much where like 1 second I'm with a person in their head, I'm feeling what they're feeling, and I feel really attached to this person. And then we go over, and it wasn't jarring either when it made the switch. It makes sense in the story. Like they're saying, I'm going to tell my story, and then it cuts to the next chapter in this first person. So like, I feel like structure-wise, it's great, and I feel like it's accessible. So anybody out there that might think, oh, that might throw me off, that might be too complicated for me, it's really not. Dan Simmons makes it very approachable and accessible, I feel like, at least for me personally. I think other people will too as well. But I wondered if you felt like the story would be better or worse had he just picked one point of view. I think it would have been lesser if it was just one point of view. I think that the dual, multiple point of views made it stronger and better. But I was wondering what you thought.
Yeah, I think that I thought about that as I was reading it too, because how can I say this without spoiling anything? Obviously, there's a very specific reason why in Fall of Hyperion we have that first person narrative from one character, and then like third person for the others at times. How can I say this? I think it was a smart, unique choice to make something realistic for us to see what other people are doing.
Yeah.
In a unique way, rather than just saying like the godly presence overall looking at all these characters. There was a specific reason why certain characters weren't speaking in like first person.
Yeah. 100%.
You know what I'm trying to say without spoiling anything?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah,
so I think that it was more impactful that way because he was able to make the significance of the first character introduced in Fall of Hyperion so much greater through this storytelling format.
100%, yeah. It made me care about these people a lot more. And there's some love to hate to love characters throughout all the Pilgrims and the side characters and the characters unrelated to the Pilgrims. But the way that he chose to tell the story by the different point of views, I felt like you said, that it really makes you attached to even ones that you wouldn't have expected to be attached to.
And then we understand why this character either sympathizes with other people or relates to them more because he has a better understanding.
Yes, that was going to be something I talked about too.
Okay.
I really felt that in the second book where certain characters are trying to help other characters and they're being standoffish or pushing away. And in a normal story, that would be the moment where that character would be like, I'm done with you, see you later. But these characters, through their bond of storytelling, through them sharing their life story, and not like their whole, I was born on this day and this is where I am now. Like they told the vital parts that related to how they got here.
Yeah.
They became more than just strangers on a pilgrimage. They became very, like, I wouldn't really say family might be too strong, but like a found family, common cause, almost like a pack, which I really, really appreciated for a multitude of reasons.
Yes.
It was a question I actually had for you. I don't know if you see it towards the bottom of what I sent you, but essentially, which planet, inside or outside the world web, would you want to live on and why? It doesn't need to be super elaborate, but I was just curious if any of the planets or locations of this, in the setting of this world, stood out to you.
I have two. I have one, which is like the heroine answer in me. Can I say this?
If it's a spoiler, it's okay. I'll like flash spoiler on the screen.
I'm going to keep it as non-spoiler as possible. I will take the role of Moneta. Okay? So I'm going to be where she is. Because that seems like a life on the edge. She's got a purpose. Yeah. And, she's not bored. So
definitely not bored.
The other answer that I'm drawn to a little bit is like hegemony? Is that how we say it?
I'm trying to think of how the audiobook says it. It may or may not be the correct way of saying it, but they say hegemony.
Hegemony?
Yeah, hegemony.
Pre-hegemony Maui Covenant. Because I just think of like ocean and dolphins. That's like what my mind goes to, and that's me in a nutshell. So those are my two very opposite answers, I suppose.
I know, right? Like two different conditions.
Yeah.
But I love that answer. It's actually Maui Covenant pre-hegemony is one of mine too.
Okay.
My other one, believe it or not, is Hyperion. Mostly because I love ancient civilizations and technology, and there's something about the time tombs themselves that, like Rachel, just had me under their entropic spell, we'll say.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind any of the labyrinthian worlds, just because I feel like I would explore those, although I don't know how I feel now that I finished both books, how much exploring I'd want to do in those. But I did have Maui Covenant as my second one, and then I did mention a third optional, just something that interested me. I don't know if I want to live there, but Old Earth. And I can't say too much without giving spoilers away, but there's something eerie about being in a place that's very empty, but has full-on cities that still exist. Almost like you're going to a theme park when it closes down. It's got this like really unsettling museum vibe to it, and I was like, ooh, I like that. But just for some reason, just like gave me chills, and I loved it.
Like John Keats' time in, I can't say.
In Fall of Hyperion.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Love that answer too. That would definitely be something I would say too. I like that answer.
But the vibe being there was so like unsettling, but weirdly comforting. I'm like, I'm
peaceful, right?
Yes, exactly.
But also lots of reasons why it's horrific.
Yes. I love it.
That's great.
I love it. So to wrap up here, and like I said, we'll probably do a part 2 of this video, talking about more themes and more of the genre-bending elements of fantasy and sci-fantasy and sci-fi horror. So I felt like there were some pretty cool horror aspects to the story as well. I did think the pacing was really well done in this story. The urgency of the time tombs, Rachel's Merlin sickness, the pilgrimage during the start of a war between the Ousters and the hegemony. I don't know if I'm going to say it now in the video. Hegemony. Like coming in, like there's something beautiful and like serene about the pilgrims on this floating boat across a sea of grass in an almost empty planet that's being evacuated, looking so beautiful. It's like visually like an environment that I was like, I want to see this brought to life on the big screen.
Yeah.
And then above them in the stars, this huge war happening. Like that was like it created that vital, very much alive aesthetic. and mood, and I never wanted to leave it. And even though it was like sad and kind of scary and urgent, it still was like weirdly comforting for me.
No, absolutely. I think adding to like the sense of urgency that the book had really was smart and well done in how the handoffs between chapters or sections of the chapters were done, even in some of the longer chapters, I suppose, how it would leave off at a cliffhanger. And for me, I'm the type of reader that loves that. Like that is always going to keep my attention and keep me going. I prefer reading that way. And so I just wanted to add that like that part of the book really added to me being on the edge of my seat, wanting to know more. And I think it was a very good mixture of this is what this person is doing, that's what these people are doing, because I really hate when time is not split very well between different characters. So I think that is part of the pacing as well, that he did a really good job with it.
That's always tough when you're juggling multiple point of views and you favor one or the other, or in this case, I didn't really favor one of them. I liked them all, but I felt like the time in between them was like just when I was starting to get like, I kind of wonder what this person's doing. Okay, cool, back with them. Like it was perfect. I never felt like, oh my God, I forgot that character's in this story. It felt like everyone's story is like boom, boom, boom. And there's a lot of like, I don't want to say time travel elements, but there's a lot of things happening at different times, we'll say. And I like that we got to see how those things weaved in and out of each other throughout the story. That was something I really enjoyed too. It was like an aspect of the point of views that I wasn't expecting, where like things would happen in one person's point of perspective during a certain time, and then on a different perspective. And, as an example of what I'm talking about, that's kind of obscure and vague, is like if you heard a gunshot in one person's point of view from someone shooting something, and in the next point of view they heard the gunshot. I just like that everything felt like it was happening at the same time, even though there was multiple times happening. I wanted to talk about real briefly the strike, because I feel like how can we not talk about the strike? Talking about Hyperion and the fall of Hyperion. For me, I felt very unsettled and terrified of it, but also just fascinated. I had so many questions, and it made me feel the same way I do when I watch a horror movie, when something is just like creeping up on you. And I felt like Dan Simmons captured that so well with his writing style and how he described it, but also like the energy and the mood and the aesthetic of the world, like not the world building per se, but like the buildings and the structures and the temples, like all of that just sort of like created this awesome vibe around the strike that like, even though it terrified me, I couldn't get enough of him. And I wanted to know what you thought about the strike too.
I think it was so smart and well done, and it makes me want to pick up his horror book or books, however many he has, because I think it was just right in the amount that it was eerie, because it wasn't overdone. I think sometimes when authors try to make the villain seem too over the top or scary, it actually takes away from what they're doing and the experience of it. So the way that he wrote the strike was so unsettling, and you were just kind of like, you know what I mean? The whole, like with this helmet over my shoulder, like, is it, but I think unsettled and anxious is the best way to describe it. And that is a horror element that I like more so than just in your face, over the top type of aspects of horror, I suppose. So I just think that it was a perfect mixture of creepy for the sci-fi story, because I love horror and sci-fi together. And I obviously can't say where this horror element comes from, because that's a huge spoiler.
Yes.
But the mixture, the combination, the idea of all of it, it's something I've never seen before. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
And that's what like adds to the creepiness too, because you're wondering, that sense of wonder and not knowing and mystery is so cool.
Mystery is such a good word for it. Unnerving mystery.
Yeah.
Strike. I felt like in horror, in fantasy, sci-fi, whichever genre, when there's a creepy monster or creature entity element, at some point enough of it has been revealed where you feel like, not necessarily, I'm not scared of you anymore, but you feel like, okay, I understand enough of you to know that I'm going to be all right, and I know that they can beat you, or I know that they can overcome you, or it's almost like we want that control. Like, I need to know what this thing is, so I feel like I understand it. And I felt like Dan Simmons kept the Shrike at such a cool distance, but not in a bad way, where I felt like just when I thought I had an idea of what the Shrike was and how it pertained to the story, it just turned on its head. And I felt like it really lent to that sense of unease and mystery to the character. I just absolutely loved it.
Yeah, because quite a few things in this book go like beyond the dimensions of our mind, like things we can't quite comprehend. And I think that's a very unsettling thing in and of itself. You have this concept of something we're not familiar with mixed with this Shrike character. So
100%. It almost dips its toe into cosmic horror, but not quite. It still feels like something else, something I haven't seen before. And I think that is the best way to describe the Shrike to new readers, is that it's just something you probably most likely have never seen or experienced before. And be careful searching fan art online, because it will haunt your dreams for life.
And I'm just going to go ahead and say, if you've read these books and you know another book series even slightly like this concept, tell me all of them. I'm going to read them all. So I need to know.
I need more of these unsettling mystery creatures in my life. Just in conclusion here too, for people that have, like us, that were either put off by it or thought that it might be too complicated or too complex, and we're kind of kept at a distance, I think this is something Brittany and I are both very passionate about when it comes to books that were either gatekept from us or we've heard from the community that people were kind of hesitant to try something out. Check out Hyperion. Check out Dan Simmons' work, at least for these two books I can speak to that I've read. It's very accessible. I don't think you will find it to be as complicated as it may seem. I happen to read it and listen to the audiobook as well. They were both wonderful. The narration's great. It really brought a layer of characterization to a lot of the different voices, especially the first-person chapters. But my best advice would be that if you're craving something new, something that does not feel like anything else I've read before, or you're just looking for something fresh and new that's also like an older story, check out Hyperion. If you're looking for a good sci-fantasy read, check out Hyperion. If you want a new reason to look over your shoulder while you're reading because something's creeping you out, check out Hyperion. And that's going to be my 2 cents on the accessibility of Hyperion. I'll let Brittany give her spiel too.
Yeah, no, I could not agree more. I think the beginning, the very first part of the introduction, there's a lot of words thrown at you, but just keep going. I mean, that's my best advice for picking up any new book that's intimidating to you, is keep going, because you can be assured that as you do, things will make sense in this story. Because like I said, I really thought I was going to have a hard time understanding things, and it didn't feel that way whatsoever. It's actually a very personable, character-driven story with also an intense plot. So I think, as I said in my video, like why you should read Hyperion, there is something for everyone in this book series. I truly do not understand. Like, if you like the elements that we described, there's no way you wouldn't like this. So
100%.
Yeah.
For everybody. I feel like there were multiple point of views that I could relate to and that I was rooting for and I could love. And I feel like that's not super rare these days, but it's something that will make a book a 4 to a 5 star to me, is when I care about more than just a couple of characters. I care about like all of them.
So I was going to say, did you want to say who your favorite character is?
Okay, well, mine's super obvious because I've already told you, but Saul Weintraub and Rachel are my favorite. Being a father and experiencing what those characters are going through, it just tugged on my heartstrings. But I really also was surprised. I really enjoyed Quesada's character too, which I didn't think I was going to, because I enjoy military aspects to fiction, but it's not like a go-to for me. If it's too much of one thing, I usually don't like it. But I felt like the little teases and swatches that we got of his story and his character, I really enjoyed, like his perspective as well. I like them all. I mean, Silenus, Lamia, like they're all so interesting to me. I think the one character that I wanted to know so much more about was the Templars, because they have such an interesting take on their faction. But yeah, I would say my favorite character was definitely Saul Weintraub and Rachel.
Okay.
What is yours?
Martin, Silenus, and, I'm going to say Braun Lamia at the same time, like the duo, the pairing. But Silenus is the tortured poet, that's just my jam. That's what I like. The woe is me. I loved his story, and I loved the journey that we saw of him throughout everything.
He was a love to hate to love character, but I also felt like his story that he told gave us like so much to feel for and relate to, and kind of like feel sorry for, and also kind of root for him. As despicable and frustrating as it could be at times, I would always remember, but remember what happened to him, and remember what he went through, what he experienced. And it was really cool to see how all these characters were products of their environment and their story, and that was really reflected in who they became by the end of it all. And I really appreciated that.
Can we just say too that, like, I don't think a lot of authors could pull off, as well as Dan Simmons did, the way that he used each character specifically for a purpose of some type in this world. Because I've seen conversations online and such of, well, what was the point of this character? I don't understand. Let me assure you, there wasn't one thing put in this story that wasn't for a purpose. Everyone was there for a reason, to give us, the reader, some more information about something. And it was so intentional and so smart and so well done. And somehow you still became attached to the character. I don't know how an author does that. Like, does all of the history, world building, political aspects through these characters, and then you still end up liking the characters.
It's like that film term, no small parts or no small roles. Even the side characters that you thought, that character, I won't ever see them again. And when they come up again, you're like, oh, wow, they really matter. Like, no one had, everyone's story, everyone's contribution to the narrative, big or small, really mattered by the end. And I think that was my favorite parts by the end of the second book, where I was like, wow, like that, what I read in that first book mattered. It made a difference. It mattered. There was no wasted filler in here.
Yeah.
And which brought me back to me just wondering, like, how did he create this? He must have like a just giant map of all these characters. And like, it just blew my mind. But I think buddy reading is so much fun. It really can unlock so many different levels of enjoyment with these books, with complex themes, not necessarily complex in accessibility, but in just being able to discuss them with other people.
Yeah.
I was dying the last half of the second book. I was just blowing up your phone like, ah! It was all capital
caps only.
And I was at work driving, like in the passenger seat. I couldn't. The guys I work with don't read this stuff, so I was like you look really intense. Like, you just don't understand what the web is doing right now. Like, don't even. But thank you so much for hanging out with me, talking about these amazing books. And I really hope to have you on again. We can talk more Hyperion and other books as well. And guys, if you haven't already, I'm sure you have, check out Books with Brittany. Her channel is awesome. She does amazing, frequent content, and it's the quality and the genuine nature of her personality shines through it all. She is a radiant human being, if you can't tell by this video. And I'm so humble and grateful to call her my friend, and so thankful to have her on my channel.
Thank you so much. These are my favorite things to do. So gush about our favorite books together. Thankfully, there's a lot that we like the same. 100%,
yeah. I think that definitely helps to find your people that like the same books and just gush about them until long after dark. So thank you so much. And I'll let you do the sign off if you want.
Thanks so much for tuning in, and stay wicked.